And welcome back to our next edition of the CBB Review Studio podcast. I am Dan Siegel, joined by my co-hosts Mat Mlodzinski and Ben Anderson. We are recording here live on February 25th, Sunday night. So 3 weeks, right, till Selection Sunday, and 1 week until we'll be talking conference tournaments. At least the beginning of the low majors and the mid majors will be starting coming up. So a lot going on. First off, how you guys doing? We'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, doing well. Obviously, another crazy week in college basketball. Happy to wrap this week up, but it kind of feels like we've moved on from the regular season in a sense. I know that we're still in the regular season. Conference tournaments aren't getting started for a while, but it just kind of seems like we've kind of hit that playoff atmosphere in college basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. Every game means something at this point, and it's very exciting to watch, especially the bubble teams right now, fight for their tournament lives. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the next final 2 weeks of the regular season plays out.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing bracketology since basically the beginning of the year. A lot of people have, but this is like the time where every game really means, that much and has an effect on your bubble placement. So let's get started. Instead of our winners and losers this week, this is actually a conversation I wanted to discuss. So for those of you that don't know, I'm sure if you're plugged into the college basketball world, you do at this point, but Kyle Filipowski and the Wake Duke game, there was a court storming after Wake defeated Duke and kind of an upset win, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, there's a court storming. Wake won at home, and Kyle Filipowski got injured somehow in the midst of that whole thing. I mean, there's debates to whether or not he initiated the contact, whether or not the student that knocked him over initiated the contact, whether it was a little bit of both. I don't know, but I just wanted to bring this up first because it's a hot topic in college basketball. So, I mean, what do you guys think about court storming? Do you think this is a freak incident? And just tell me your thoughts.
So I think a lot of things can be true at once here. One, I think that court storming should not be banned. I think it's sort of what makes college basketball special. You don't see this happening in the NBA, and it provides more of that atmosphere that I think a lot of fans look for. So one, court storming should not be banned. The other side is Wake handled this very poorly. They were running on the court within a second of that buzzer going off, and they did so rather unsafely. I think that the security could have handled it a little better, given the Duke players a bit of a better chance to get off in time. If I were Kyle Filipowski, I don't know how I would react to hundreds of people storming the court and I'm just trying to get off. But the aerial footage, like Dan said, made it a little bit ambiguous on which side was in contact first there. I think that overall, this is not a great look, especially when you consider what happened to Caitlin Clark about a month ago as well. These two stars trying to get off the court and they run into fans, right? But I think that this is going to blow over faster than people think. And I think court storming will still happen next year. And I think it should still happen next year. I think that security can handle it better, but it's still a part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, interesting points that you bring up. I'm on the same side as you, honestly. Like, college basketball, college sports in general are made better when you can storm the court, storm the field. One of my best memories from a college game is when Syracuse upset Clemson and we stormed the field. I mean, that still is one of my favorite memories. I've been to better games. That was obviously an awesome game, but like the storming the field part was like, hey, we did this. This was awesome. As far as how to make it better, though, I think there's a couple things. I think one, students just need to be less dumb, right? Like, this has been going on for however long in college basketball, and it has not been an issue until now. So I don't know if it's just a couple freak instances or if people are just getting more dumb as time goes on. I'm probably going with that latter. I've heard that, maybe you wait 30 seconds, a minute until you let them storm the court. I think that takes all the fun out of it. I think part of the fun is once the buzzer sounds, everyone rushes the court. I think if anything, again, just make sure that the students are being safe about it, and just hope you don't run into this. I mean, like, I guess you can't control what someone might do. Maybe you give it a 10-second countdown. I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know if there's one great way to fix it, because no matter what, it's going to either be disappointing for the game, or you might have a worse injury happen.
I like, if you evaluate, there's been hundreds upon hundreds of court stormings this year, right? There's been a lot. And I think if you do it like statistically, there's a very low percentage chance, or at least in practice, there's been a very low percentage of court stormings that have resulted in players getting hurt in any way. But I also happen to be on both of your sides. I also think that if there is any risk factor for the players, and if you feel that any amount of risk is too much, like, I think that's a valid point. But for me, it's about the reward, the boost of the atmosphere, the reason that this makes college sports so special. Like you said, what separates it from the pros, why we love college sports so much, that reward outweighs the minor risk. But I see both sides of it. I just wanted to acknowledge, play a little devil's advocate, but I guess all three of us are on the same page. That's pretty good to hear. And I mean, regardless, big win for the Demon Deacons. We'll discuss a lot of bracketology, a lot of around the conferences. We'll go around the Power 7 now. And yeah, but first, before we get to that, let's get to last week's biggest games. So we had a series of 7 games, like usual, that we discuss. I'll start with the headliner, actually. So right at the top of the screen right there, Creighton 85, UConn 66. Of course, Creighton turns around and gets smoked by St. John's, while UConn reasserts their dominance in the game against Villanova. But I think it shows that the Huskies are not perfect. They're susceptible to a down game. A lot of people just simply believe they were not, and they were just a really, really just dominant number one clear-cut team in the country. And I'm very into like the shot quality, the expected score based on the shots taken in the game. Creighton still won the shot quality game, but they only won by 3.5. So the margin of victory was because they got stupid hot. UConn went stupid cold. But that's kind of what Creighton is as a team. They're a very hot or cold team. You don't know what you're going to get. We talk about high variance a lot. Creighton's a prime example, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Creighton and what they did. I mean, you kind of said it perfectly right there. Like, people were starting to elevate UConn way up here, and I think that it's still a mix of UConn, Purdue, Houston at the top. You got some maybe those are like the 1AA teams. You got some other 1A teams. I think that it's a lot closer than people imagined. UConn has been on a great run, but they had some closer calls when Klingon was out, and I know that at full health, this team is pretty dominant. But Klingon is susceptible to foul trouble. So you have to treat him the same way that he was out with his injury as what could happen if he picks up 2 quick fouls, because that's just what's going to happen. And UConn learned how to play without him, but that's going to be key. I want to look at the Washington State game in particular, because that was just an awesome ending. A 4-point play for Washington State at the end there. Caleb Love tripped and fell in crunch time. I mean, there was just so much with so many like players. Like, of course, it's Caleb Love that does that of all players in college basketball. Arizona still on the 1 line for me, but it's getting closer. It is like the top 3 1 seeds, clear cut. Arizona losing that game, I'm not so sure anymore. But Washington State, talk about locking up a bid with 1 win. We talk about teams on the bubble, and we're going to be going into some discussion on them later, but Washington State, certainly a little bit above the bubble coming into this game. But, you know, if they had a bad end of the season, could rejoin the bubble. They said, nah, we're just going to go in, beat Arizona, lock it up right now. And you just got to give props to Kyle Smith, who is one of, if not the choice for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, and I'll let you cook, Ben, in just a sec. I just wanted to put this stat out there before we end this game discussion. So this was put out by one of the guys at the 3-man weave. I forgot which one. But in Arizona's 6 losses, Caleb Love is averaging 20 field goal attempts. In their 20 wins, he's averaging 13.2 field goal attempts. So just a little food for thought right there. Over-reliance on him. Or I don't know if it's a correlation or if it's a causation right there, but it's definitely something that is notable.
Yeah, I'm kind of tired of blaming Caleb Love for a lot of things, especially with this Arizona team. I think it's less prevalent than North Carolina. He is the reason they're one seed, right? If you take Caleb Love off this roster, what does it look like? They're not a one seed, right? So it's not all on him. I've never been like more confident that a team cannot go 4-0 in a region than I am by looking at Arizona. I just like, do they win 4 games in a row in the NCAA tournament playing 4 good teams? I don't see how they make it to the Final Four in that sense. Like I absolutely at their ceiling, they can win a national championship, but we haven't seen them at their ceiling for 6 straight games, I feel like. And that's what concerns me a little bit when we talk about the Wildcats as a national title contender. But we'll go to the game down below, which, my God, it was what? The highest over-under since 2019, I believe, was Kentucky, Alabama at 179.5, and they blew that out of the water. This was a beatdown. It was a 25-point win for Kentucky, and it wasn't even that close, right? You saw that game and you would look at the scoreboard and Kentucky, I think it was like 92-59 at one point, something crazy like that. You just don't see these numbers. Justin Edwards finally had a breakout game. Man, if Edwards can develop, that suddenly Kentucky becomes very scary, right? Because now they're no longer relying on solely Dillingham, Shepard, and Reeves. And it just, if we all talk about high variance, Kentucky is maybe even higher than Creighton, right? These two teams are some of the hardest to predict in the country. As for the Crimson Tide, they still can't beat anyone with a pulse if they're not named Auburn, and I stand by that. Like it just hasn't happened yet. Every time they play a good team, I feel like something like this happens. They don't necessarily get blown out every time, but I just haven't seen enough from them to validate like seeing them on the 3 line. I get why they are, but I don't know. It feels like around a 32 exit, depending on the matchup for Alabama.
This was actually not even the highest scoring regulation Division I game this year. I mean, just a fun fact: UMBC and Albany had a 114-102 game earlier this year. That was in regulation, but I believe that would make it the second highest. Just, yeah. I mean, like you said, a lot of Alabama's points came later. Yeah, Kentucky, I think some 14 seed that like I tweeted this out. Like a 14 seed that is veteran heavy. They cut really well. They run a lot of action. They're going to give Kentucky's defense fits. But if they get the right matchups, like this could be a fun team to ride the wave. So again, very matchup dependent for the Wildcats, depending on their region. Everybody else like to also talk about this tale of 2 games. You see right here on the screen, you got Kentucky, Alabama, and then North Carolina, Virginia. Same sport, and the scores were 117-92 and 54-44. And I mean, UNC defeating UVA right there. UNC did get bogged down, I guess, to UVA's style of play, but same story as old if you're a UVA fan like myself and Ben. Cormac Ryan, just UNC, and him in particular, just better shot makers. UVA plays a style that's like just so precise that you need to execute things perfectly. And that's difficult to do, especially with their roster, especially with their youth. And they've, 3 straight games without scoring 50 points? I'll be at the UVA at Boston College game next week. I really hope they could somehow put some offense together, but it's been brutal for the Hoos, really brutal.
Yeah, I think you can boil it down to the fact that Virginia's offense relies on good shooters. And when you go 2 from 13 from 3, all of a sudden the mover blocker scheme doesn't seem so scary anymore when it's not Kyle Guy running off those the screens at the elbow, right? And now I would love to see some sort of adjustment. I don't know what it is. We brought in a freshman in Elijah Gertrude, and he brought some good minutes overall, I would say. So maybe that's the beginning of something. But I do feel like in order to change it, we just can't score. Like we scored 60 points, 16 points and a half against Virginia Tech, which we'll get to around the conferences, and then turned around and did the exact same thing in the first half against UNC. It's frustrating to watch that over and over again.
Yeah, and I feel like from another sense too, like from someone who's not a fan, because you guys are both fans, like I appreciate Virginia's defense. I think everyone can appreciate their defense in that game, especially shutting down North Carolina, a North Carolina team that can certainly go off on offense. But it's just something needs to change in 2024 for this Virginia team to be successful. I think they also just need to recruit better offensive players, honestly. Like, you can still have a good defense, but you need to have good offensive players. And, I mean, other than like Reese Beekman, I just haven't seen it with Virginia this year. I feel like some of the mid-major guys just didn't really click like we thought they would. I don't know if you guys want to move on to any other games or not, but I kind of do want to look at the Houston-Baylor game because that was just like another wild ending along with the Washington State one where it was like a buzzer beater that didn't count. I mean, like, just not in the nick of time, and then we go to overtime. And props to Houston because, like, I feel like one thing we've seen in college basketball this year, if a team gets an early win on the early part of a week over a top 25 team, more often than not, they're susceptible to losing on the weekend because they just had like a tough game. And you look at Houston beating Iowa State and beating Baylor back to back in the same week. I don't know if the Cougars are number one. I still think that UConn has a good case to be number one. I think you could say Purdue, but I voted Houston just because of that. I mean, you beat two top 11 teams in 1 week. That deserves something. I think the Cougars you need to keep an eye on because they seem like they're just getting better. The trust level for me wasn't there because it wasn't the same team as the past couple of years, but like Kelvin Sampson just always knows how to make this team play well.
Yeah, I mean, this was definitely game of the week. I think we talked about a lot of high variance teams. Honestly, Houston's probably the example of a low variance team. I think they're a safe bet, and it's the same way every year. They will just win 3 games plus in the tournament, and they are just so like they've reached peak Virginia era, like Tony Bennett era levels of elite man-to-man defense. It's incredible. And then I'll just wrap up the last 2 games. So Tarleton State 77, Grand Canyon 74. We'll always acknowledge the winner first. Like Tarleton State Texans are putting together a real solid 20-win season. They can't go dancing anyway. They're still part of that D1 transition, but good for them. That said, when Grand Canyon also loses on Saturday to 11-15 Abilene Christian, it's tough to really defend them still being a tournament team. We'll talk about that more later, so I'm not going to elaborate too much on that. And then the final game we haven't discussed yet, Utah State 68, San Diego State 63. I mean, that's just life in the Mountain West. Home road split for the Aggies and the Aztecs. And shout out Darius Brown, who has had a couple of really, really good games lately. He's the Middle Tennessee transfer for Utah State. So he's really stepped up, and that's been huge for the Aggies. You guys have any other comments on these games? All right, then let's go around the conferences. So we are going to start as we'll start with the ACC, right? That makes sense the most. So Ben, I think you said you want to take the ACC this week, so take us away.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and stay in the Commonwealth. We've been talking about Virginia for a little bit, but man, I think the loss to North Carolina wouldn't have been so concerning had we not gotten 30-pieced by Virginia Tech the week before, or the Monday before, losing 75-41, Virginia Tech beating Virginia in Blacksburg. That was just it was a miserable game, and Virginia Tech played well. Like, credit to them, but I think everything went wrong that could have gone wrong in that game for the Hoos, and it's not necessarily super indicative of their medium. But again, we mentioned that something has to change here. Moving outside of the state of Virginia, though, Wake Forest looked very impressive these 2 weeks. Court storming aside, getting that win over Duke was really impressive. Hunter Sallis at 29, arguably looking like the second best guard in the ACC. And on the Tuesday before that, they thrashed Pitt 91-58. So that offense is firing on all cylinders. I'm happy the Demon Deacons were able to actually get a win of note, finally sort of get that monkey off their back, you could say. Meanwhile, the Panthers, I think they're a little bit dead, but we won't be able to see. I think there's a solid class of bid stealers actually in the ACC with Pitt and Syracuse and NC State all looking somewhat dangerous. They're all capable of beating some of the top teams in the league, and I'm interested to see what they do in the ACC tournament, even though their bubble hopes are probably a little bit dead. Meanwhile, down south, Miami, man, this was supposed to be like a decent year, and maybe not Final Four like last year, but to go 0-2 with losses to Georgia Tech and then just getting cooked by Duke in the midweek game, that has to be disappointing for Jim Larrañaga and a team that has talent. Like, they have Nigel Pack and Matthew Cleveland and Norchad Omier. I thought they were going to be a lot better than they are currently, but it's just a tough way to go. And then finally, shouts to Clemson. Brad Brownell does get it done, brings the Tigers back to the tournament. They went 2-0 this week, so they should not be sweating Selection Sunday, I can't imagine. But we're looking like a 5-bid ACC. I don't think anyone is really up in arms about that number at this point in the year.
Yep. Few bubble teams, so it'll sort itself out. I believe 5 as well. Matt, take us into the Big East.
Yeah, as always, Big East, obviously my conference. We kind of already mentioned a lot about the Creighton and UConn game, but I guess I'll go a little bit more in depth on there. As far as, I think it's time that we do realize that Creighton is for sure a top 3 team in the Big East. I had tiered it before as far as UConn and Marquette were the top tier. We need to see what Creighton's made of. Well, we saw what they're made of. They can beat anyone in the country, clearly. Obviously, being at home in Omaha, that's a tough place to play, but the Blue Jays got it done there. And then we kind of teased it, though. St. John's. I mean, this is a St. John's team that is right up on the bubble. You want to talk about bubble teams? Look at the Big East. Half the conference is on the bubble, the true bubble. St. John's helping their case probably more than anyone this week, especially because they were further back on the bubble than most teams. I still have them out of my tournament as the first team out because let's not forget, this team is under 500 in conference play. They have 12 losses overall. They still need some more wins to make that overall resume better, but that's one heck of a start over Creighton. Villanova, another team we need to look at. I mean, you're getting blown out by UConn. You're trying to stay on the bubble. I think we need to see if the Wildcats are maybe packing it in if they lose another game. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, they got enough quad 1 wins to keep themselves alive, but they got 3 quad 3 and 4 losses, one of them being to Penn, a Penn team that is not good. They're not even going to make the Ivy League tournament. So that's concerning. Drexel, another team that really fell off. So Villanova with a couple of shaky losses there. Xavier, I do want to talk about as well, because this team is now under 500 overall, not just in conference play. Somehow they've still kind of seen themselves on the bubble, but I just don't understand how 27 games in, a team under 500 is anywhere under consideration. Xavier needs to figure it out. But again, injuries caught up with them. I don't think it's all their fault. And then, of course, the Seton Hall Butler game, a game that was dear to my heart. Pirates able to get that win, somehow still not climbing up in the metrics, but a team that is 4th place in the Big East that seems to beat every bubble team they play. I think you really need to shout out Shaheen Holloway for the job that he's done for this team that was picked to finish 9th in the conference. And another look at Butler. I think Thad Matta is going to need another year. I think Butler can be really, really good next year. But let's not sleep on them, because even if Butler doesn't make the tournament this year, they have been a lot better. They've just been more wins, more competitive than they were last year. And you got to give a real shout out to the year 2 coach there. I'll give a quick shout out as well, guys. Georgetown, DePaul. Georgetown getting that win. 2 conference wins for Ed Cooley. 2 of them, a whole 2. The Hoyas are back. Those are my takeaways.
How many did they have the last 3 years combined?
-1.
Yeah, like since they remember when they made that Big East tournament run. Since that, I think they probably doubled the amount of conference wins since then. Let's move on to the Big Ten, where I did the power rankings for CBB Review site this past week, and honestly, it was a pretty insignificant week, but I was going through those power rankings, and this is just not a very impressive group of teams, in my opinion. I mean, you got a couple of good teams at the top. Purdue specifically, they take care of Michigan and Rutgers this week. But your other best team, Illinois, they just dropped another game they probably should have won. They lost at Penn State. I mean, Terrence Shannon has really been turning it on. There's a lot to be said about that. He has, in his last 5 games, 28, 31, 27, 35, and 12 points. Really getting to the line a lot, and that is huge for Illinois, but losing that game at Penn State, not very good. And as far as a couple teams in that second tier that are pretty hot, Northwestern, they've sneakily won 4 out of their last 5. So I believe I saw them on the 9 line in bracket matrix today. So good for them. Win over Michigan this week is what they had. Nebraska, they're pretty hot as well. They've won at Indiana and then home against Minnesota this week. I don't know. Like, aside from that, Wisconsin, their struggles continue. They did end up beating Maryland at home, but they did not look at all impressive in the process of doing so. But I guess a win is a win, a 1-0 week for Wisconsin. You'll take that. And then Michigan State, they grabbed their 10th and 11th loss this week, losing to Iowa and Ohio State at home. Somehow still they're solidly in the field. I think that's a lot of losses for a team that is in a pretty underwhelming conference this year. But, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess preseason confirmation bias always comes through. I don't understand it with Michigan State, but
it's the metric, man. It's the
metrics.
They're like 20th in KenPom or something like that.
People got to understand those are predictive metrics, not.
I agree with you.
Yeah, but
do you see their schedule to end it?
No, what do they got?
It's at Purdue, home at Northwestern, at Indiana.
Okay. Yeah, like so they get up to like 12, 13, 14 losses. Like
right. Like if you finish with 14 losses in the regular season, I don't know.
But Ben, take us away with your SEC takeaways from this past week.
Yeah, this conference is nothing if not entertaining, in my opinion. Tennessee like barely snuck by Mizzou. They only won by 5 and then just shellacked Texas A&M. It was a 35-point win. Texas A&M has to be the most disappointing team. There are a lot of disappointing teams. One of the most disappointing teams in the country here. They had top 15 level hype surrounding them in the preseason, and it just didn't click, unfortunately, with this team. They went 0-2. They also had a loss to Arkansas this week to drop to, I believe, below 500 in the conference. Alabama won against Florida despite just shooting just 8 for 32 from three-point range. So that was somewhat encouraging. But again, they're giving up like just so many points all the time. And I think that catches up to you with the fast-paced play of March Madness. I would be a little worried picking the Crimson Tide to go real far, especially with that loss to Kentucky like we saw. Like, meanwhile, right, like if we saw, Alabama wins at Florida 98-93, Kentucky loses to LSU on a freak broken play by Tyrell Ward for a game winner. That crowd was great, by the way. If we showed those two scores to people on Wednesday and said, hey, if we're going to turn around and Alabama's going to lose by 25 to Kentucky, I think people would have called you crazy. But yet, this is sort of the SEC at this point. So, like I said, can't be much more entertaining than they are at this point. Ole Miss, we're going to talk about them later in the bracketology segment, but they went 0-2, losing to Mississippi State and then to South Carolina. It's the classic situation where you have this power conference. This usually happens in the Big 12, but you have this power conference team that looks great in the non-con, goes 13-1, picks up a couple of nice wins, in this case Memphis, and then just can't figure it out in conference play, goes to 500. Are they in? Do they have enough good wins? Stuff like that. It'll be a very interesting team to look at when we get to Selection Sunday. And then finally, Auburn continues to be fantastic at beating up on sub-top 30 KenPom teams without actually winning against any good ones. So the state of Alabama has something for that apparently, but we'll learn about a little bit more about the Tigers, I suspect, as they go into a big week for them.
All right, and then we'll finish our second to last pairing right here. But Matt, take us away with Pac-12 and then a little bit Mountain West.
Yeah, Pac-12. I mean, we really harped on the only game that matters in the Conference of Champions, and that's Arizona and Washington State, because those are the two teams that everyone's focusing on in the Pac-12. The fact that Arizona obviously is still a 1 seed in my mind. Oops, put you on there, Dan. That's my bad. Still a 1 seed in my mind, but Washington State, obviously, like I mentioned before, locking up a seat in the tournament no matter what they are. They're not going to fall out of the tournament. The Cougars are safe. But there was another game, an under the radar game, a bubble game between Colorado and Utah. I'm safe to say that Colorado is is last four in my opinion, right now. And I'm safe to say that Utah, and we're going to talk about them more later, but I don't know what to think about the Utes anymore. They went 1-1 this week, but you look at what Colorado's been able to do. The Buffaloes picked up a convincing win, and I think that it's time to say that Tad Boyle, maybe is he starting to get what he wanted out of these guys? I mean, they're starting a freshman. It's not going to happen overnight. I know that they had a lot of players from last season. They had one of the best turnover rates in the country as far as like roster turnover goes. Maybe that's the sign. Maybe some teams just gel real later than others. And then Oregon losing a game. I mean, Oregon is firmly on the bubble, and then just losing a game that they really shouldn't lose to last week. The Pac-12, I'm just ready for it. Honestly, guys, I'm ready for the Pac-12 to just disband. Like, what are we doing here? The Pac-12 is just, I mean, you got like one seed, and then you got two teams that should make the tournament. I mean, it's going to be a 2 or 3 bid league. And that's why I'm going to transition that into the Mountain West, because it's totally different. I mean, we see these teams continue to beat up on each other, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'll single out a couple teams. I'll keep this one short. Colorado State, I'm worried about. They've lost 2 straight. I think they're still firmly in the tournament, but we need to look at the Rams because, yes, I know they were ranked, but clearly, as we've seen in the case of like Memphis and other teams, you can be ranked, and 2 weeks later, you can be on the bubble, and I'm concerned about Colorado State right now. Utah State, I think, is locking themselves in. San Diego State is locked in. New Mexico had a very, very bad loss to Air Force, and hopefully for their sake that they can get back from that. I think they're fine. I don't think they're on the bubble just yet. But overall, Mountain West didn't have its best week, but you're still seeing just why this conference is so much better than its West Coast counterpart, because there's just better teams, just better players, better teams. They're beating up on each other, whereas in the Pac-12, they're losing to the bottom feeders.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a debate like Pac-12 versus Mountain West. There's been a lot of Twitter discourse about ACC versus Mountain West, which we could get into another time. But we're going to finish this segment off with the Big 12. And we started off this show pretty early by just talking about what a game that was between Houston and Baylor. But Baylor also did lose to BYU. And BYU, by the way, has been a mildly pleasant surprise in their first year here. It's not shocking to see BYU be good, but they've overperformed expectation a little bit, I believe. So good for them. I still really like Baylor. Like, I know they've lost 2 games this week in true talent. I think they're right there in that top tier of the SEC, or I'm sorry, of the Big 12, along with the Houstons and the Kansases and the Iowa States. Like, I think Baylor is right there. Houston, I think they should be number 1 in the country in the AP poll tomorrow. I already mentioned just how elite their defense is, but they could come through offensively as well. And Iowa State did lose at Houston this week, but beat West Virginia. So then, I don't know, kind of 2 expected results. Not much to be said there. Iowa State remains like a top 10 team. Kansas has been mounting together some wins. We've criticized Kansas a lot, but they did beat Texas pretty handily this week, and Nick Timberlake actually looking like a Division I basketball player. That's a pretty nice development, especially with McCullough, who's been out here and there. He's been nicked up. I presume this is a short-term absence. You guys could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he'll be back in the near future. Texas schools, TCU, Texas Tech, and Texas all went 1-1 this week. They're all kind of clustered on that 6 to 9 line. And along with Oklahoma. Oklahoma took Oklahoma State, I should say, took Oklahoma down to the wire, but the Sooners did survive. And then just a rough week for Cincinnati. They lost to Oklahoma State. That's a big no-no. And then they got smoked by TCU. So they're, at the moment, they can play themselves in. Plenty of opportunities still, but they're not looking like a tournament team right now. So those are my major Big 12 takeaways right there. And then it looks like we might have lost Ben. I'm sure we'll get him back in just a sec. But let's move on. So we are going to continue with our bracketology segment each episode, and we're going to play this game that we've played a couple times, I feel like, on this pod, but it's definitely, applies to some of these bubble teams that are trending down. Welcome back, Ben. So we got 5 bubble teams I'm going to list one at a time, and I want you guys to tell me whether you're relaxed about them, you want to worry, or you're going to hit the panic button. So relax, worry, or panic. We're going to start with our Virginia Cavaliers. They've lost 3 of their last 4. Their offense has been abysmal. And I'll throw it to Ben. Relax, worry, or panic.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to go in the middle here and say worry, right? Because if the season ended today, which it doesn't, Virginia would still be in the field, I think. They have enough good wins. They're in the top 4 of the ACC. I think, have shown enough, like wins over Clemson and wins over, Texas A&M doesn't look that great anymore, but they have enough on their resume to sneak in. However, what makes me worried is these last 3 games. They are at Boston College, at Duke, and at home against Georgia Tech. They could very conceivably go 0-3 in those games, right? And then where does that leave you? And that's why I'm a little worried, because like if they go 2-1, they're probably in, right? If they lose at Duke and win the other 2, they're probably in. But if they go 1-2, things get a little hairy. Dan, you're going to be at that BC game. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts once everything, the dust settles there, and I think we'll get a much better view of where Virginia's at overall.
Ben, I'm gonna relax about it. And again, I know that I'm not a Virginia guy. You guys probably are a little bit more up in arms than I am about this. But as someone who's completely non-biased, I like Virginia. I mean, I think Boston College can be a trick game. I don't see Virginia going 0-3. I think if they go 1-2, then yeah, I'd be worried. But I just am very confident in Virginia's ability to just take care of business against BC and Georgia Tech. I feel like Tony Bennett he knows what's at stake. They have a whole week off between that Duke and Georgia Tech game, so I'm sure that if they go 1-1, they'll prepare and know that, hey, we win this game, it'll, secure our seed, which looks like it will be the 3 seed in the ACC tournament. Like, I just don't see how you could let a team like that out. I know their seeding might not reflect like their win-loss record as much as many people would think. Like, if you see a Virginia team that's 22-10 and only getting a 10 seed, some people will be like, how? Because then you get like teams with 11 or 12 losses that'll have like a 3 seed. But I think that they will be in the field no matter what. I'm relaxed right now.
Wow, I'm going different than both of you. I'm panicking, and I think maybe this is more like holistic and more like putting it into context of what the expectations for the Virginia program are and where they've been 3 to 5 years ago versus today. But like, I have no doubt. Sorry about that. I have no doubt that this team could sneak into the tournament. I think most likely this team does sneak into the tournament. More than 50% chance. That said, I have zero faith in Virginia doing anything once they get there, meaning that it would be 3 consecutive first-round upsets or exits and 4 and 5 appearances. And I think it's just look at the whole program. I think Tony Bennett needs to make a really, really big change in the style that they play. And I think a lot of Virginia fans were reserved to make that conclusion. I think everybody's finally come along on that. So that's why I'm panicked. Next team, New Mexico. Throw it back to Ben.
Yeah, so I think it was Matt that mentioned he was like, oh well, at least the top teams in the Mountain West don't lose to the bottom of the league. Well,
yeah,
New Mexico just lost to Air Force at home. I thought we were all 3 high, very, very high on New Mexico, the Lobos coming in. So I was very surprised to see that they're just very unreliable at best. And I think they are a good team. I still am scared if I play them, especially if like they look super good in their 8-9 or 7-10 game, and all of a sudden you're a 2 seed having to face them. But I don't know. I don't know about this team. They have the wins, over San Diego State, over Utah State, they beat Nevada, they beat Colorado State. So they showed they can play with the big guys, but there's just something about this team that makes me think they're a little bit inconsistent. They're the type of team that can go 1-1 in the tournament. And if it's down to a first 4 game, I don't think it will be. But if it's down to a first 4 game, am I taking New Mexico? Do I trust them enough to win that most important game? And I'm just not sure I am. So for that reason, I'm worried. I think that like sort of like Virginia, I think they'll get into the tournament, but I'm not sure what they're going to do once they get there.
I'm worried. I'm not panicking yet because I don't know what you consider bubble. Like I got New Mexico as a 9 seed right now, but they're kind of like an in-between team. Their net is good. Their KenPom is good. Their BPI and their SOR they're outside the top 50 in both of those. They've got 4 quad 1 wins. They've got a pair now of quad 3 and 4 losses. So they are starting to look like a true bubble team if it weren't for the fact that the Mountain West is what it is right now. If they had that resume in the ACC, they might even be down a whole seed line. I'm worried as well because you look at these last 3 games, losing to Air Force tells me that maybe they can lose to Fresno State. Like, I'm 90% positive they'll win that game. They're at home. But still, you just lost to Air Force. The other 2 games on the road at Boise State and on the road against Utah State, arguably the 2 hottest teams in the Mountain West. So, kind of like how you guys said, could Virginia finish 0-3, 1-2 in their last 3? I'm looking at, New Mexico. Even if they finish 1-2, is 22-9 good enough to keep them safely in, or will they need to win a game in the Mountain West just to secure that? Like, I'm not sure. I'm definitely a little worried. If they can just grab this Boise State win, no worried at all, because then I think they'll beat Fresno State. They're a lock. They're in. But I am worried because I didn't think it was conceivable they would lose to Air Force.
Yeah. I mean, what happened to that New Mexico, like, one of the most underrated home court advantages in the country? Like, they always win at home. What happened to that? Disappointing. I'm also worried. I think in between is the best place to go there. Nothing really more to add. I think they're probably like on the 8 line or 9 line right now. Matt, you'll have your bracketology. I think you just put yours out, so we can check that out. But moving on to the next team, we'll stay on the west portion of the country. Grand Canyon. They've lost their previous 2. They are probably out of the at-large picture right now. I still think they could play their way into the at-large bid, but I think they could only lose 1 game between now and the end of the season, and that game has to be the conference championship game. So I don't know. I'm not going to go panic because it's Grand Canyon, right? You're not evaluating that program saying the expectation is at-large bid every season or bust. But it is disappointing to see them fall off because they were a fun team to follow.
Yeah, I'm gonna cheat and give you 2 answers because one is, okay, how do you feel about their at-large chances? And that I'm panicking about. You cannot lose 2 straight games in the way that they did. Their whole shtick is that they're hanging on. They have this gaudy record. They're gonna blow away the WAC and then maybe lose a fluke game in the conference championship game, and they have 3 losses. You could put that team in with a win over San Diego State. Now that's just not the case anymore. And I don't really see the justification for having Grand Canyon as an at-large team. Excuse me. However, in terms of just getting in the tournament through the auto bid, I'm cool with that. I think they're pretty clearly the best team still in the WAC, despite having those 2 conference losses. I think it was a bad week, and they'll come around to the tournament when it really does matter, and they're going to blow the competition away because I just think they're a little bit more talented, right? They have that win over San Diego State. They've sort of proven their worth. And I think we'll see Grand Canyon in the tournament, just not as an at-large team.
I'm panicked because I think that at this point, the only thing Grand Canyon can hold on to is their 3-2 record in quad 1 and 2, which is pretty good. But again, it's not like their quad 1 and 2 wins, besides the San Diego State one, aren't the same as other teams with that amount of wins, and it's still not a lot. It all depends what they do, who they lose to. If they were to lose to, I'm looking at the standings right now. I mean, you could really only justify Seattle as the only team that if they lose to in the conference championship, something like that, maybe that's all right because they're 11-6 in conference, 18-10 overall. They're playing well. I don't know if you can really justify anyone else. This should be a conference that they just roll by. But I am panicked because I feel like Grand Canyon felt pretty safe that they should just win out, we'll lose a game, we'll be fine, kind of like you guys have mentioned. Well, now they lost 2 before the conference tournament, and now it's a Grand Canyon team that has the pressure on them of winning the tournament. So I like how you mentioned before, like, we're not expecting this team to be an at-large team, but if I am a Grand Canyon fan, I've gone from relaxed to panic within 3 days.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, also keep this in mind, right? Charlton, if they play Charlton State in the finals and they lose, they're still getting in because I mentioned the Charlton State D1 transition. They're not eligible for the tournament, all that. I'm not a fan of that policy, but it is what it is. 2 more teams, though. We'll start with Utah. And they've had just 2 wins since January 21st. So how are we feeling about these guys?
I'm so out on Utah. There's no reason to be even talking about them as an at-large team at this point, unless you really love their win against BYU. They're 7-9 in a Pac-12 that we've already pretty much agreed is not a good conference, right? They just have lost 5 of their last 7. Their wins are against Colorado and a bad mid UCLA team, right? But you lose to the worst team in USC. You get boat raced by Colorado. You lose to Arizona State. You lose to Washington State by 22. This just isn't a tournament team. I don't even know if it's panic as much as it is acceptance of that fact, but that's just where the Utes are right now.
Matt,
I'm with you right there. Like, I just don't know if it's a tournament team. And I think that this is a prime example of why there needs to be some sort of almost added weight, in my opinion, on how much games actually count for the tournament in November and the beginning of December. Like, non-conference has to count. We can't diminish that. But Utah looked like a top 5 seed in the non-conference. They now don't even look like an NIT team in Pac-12 play. So I'm like, what's the line there? Like, this is clearly not the same team they were in the beginning of the season, and in a bad way. And it just sucks because you get a team like South Florida that is playing out of their minds, but because they had 2 bad losses in November, we're holding that against them. Whereas Utah hasn't played well in over 2 months, but we're still letting it slide because they beat Wake Forest, they beat BYU, and they beat St. Mary's. Some great wins, but what have they done since? And you know what? They're not really going to get a chance because they got Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, and Oregon.
Yeah.
That's not great.
I don't really have anything to add on Utah. Final team we're going to do is Ole Miss, which they're currently looking like a first 4 out kind of team. I don't know. I don't think if I'm putting at 50-50 odds, I don't think they make the tournament. That said, I'm only going to go with the worry because, like, I think it's still a respectable first year for Chris Beard, I would say. So, like, it's not ideal if they don't make the tournament, but if I'm an Ole Miss fan right now, I'm not, like, panicked because, we're not making the tournament. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, from that perspective, I get it. I guess I would just go worried as well. If you look at the SEC, their current wins are Florida. That's a good win. Vanderbilt, whatever. Arkansas, bad. Texas A&M, bad. Mississippi State is okay. Like, they're going to be a tournament team. Then Missouri is the worst team in the league. They haven't beaten anyone in the top 6, right? They haven't been really close. I don't know. There's no – they don't really have the wins, right? We thought Memphis was going to be a better win than it is. And then your next best non-con win is UCF, right? You only beat Detroit, one of the worst teams in college basketball, by 1 point. I know you just said devalue those November wins, but, like, man, that wasn't a great showing. The more I think about Ole Miss, the more I think, a team maybe like Butler or Providence, like those types of teams that have actually shown it and shown it more recently, I think are a little bit more deserving. I'm not the selection committee, but that's the way I would think about it.
I would agree. I feel like I'm worried because, like, if you're an Ole Miss fan and based on what they've done, they've beat the teams usually that they're supposed to beat. So you should probably look at beating Missouri and beating Georgia, albeit both of games on the road. That could help their case because it's 2, like, not great teams, but they get them on the road, so at least they could add road wins. And then their 2 home games are their tougher games against Alabama and Texas A&M. So, like, I'm worried because it's not looking great. But they have opportunity out in front of them without having to play like Tennessee or Kentucky. Like, they're not playing the top at the top. They get Bama at home. there's a real chance for Ole Miss to go 3-1, but I think that they should be worried because that Alabama win, I feel like they need to get. If they don't get that one with how Texas A&M has fallen off, I still don't know if the other three will improve their metrics enough because their metrics are pretty far down. I mean, they're like Ole Miss is 88th in BPI. Like, that's bad. Yeah. They're 34th in SOR. They've got a couple quad one wins. Like, they're hanging around, but I mean, they got to get one of these other chances.
Yeah, in the same way that Utah is an afterthought for you guys, like Ole Miss has always been an afterthought for me. I've not locked into an Ole Miss game in a really long time. I'm not going to lie to you guys. So that's really the state where they're at right now. Let's quickly finish up with their game picks, best 7 games coming up this week. We're going to start with Baylor at TCU, and I'll start with Ben.
Yeah, Baylor, I still don't know how good they are. I really don't. We talk about high variance teams. I think Baylor is one of them. They always seem to play a close game, though, a real close game, right? If you could bet like bands where it's like when one team wins by 5 or fewer, like that's sometimes a bet you can make. That's the bet I would make against any Baylor game. In this case, though, I'm just going to take the home team because I really don't know what to do here. TCU is a good team. They're good enough for sure. I'll take the Horned Frogs.
I feel like I'm going to go with Baylor in this one. I know I usually pick the home team, and I'm not going against you on purpose, Ben, because, I do like that pick. But I feel like Baylor, they probably see like a sense of urgency. TCU's been playing good. I could see them maybe relaxing at home a bit. And then you got to just respect the coaching that Baylor has. Actually, both these teams have great coaches. I shouldn't bring that argument into it. But I just feel like for Baylor, having a national championship winning coach, understanding the assignment here, how big this is. I mean, I say Baylor's a lock. This could really lock them in to a top 5 seed, no matter what happens. And I think they probably see what's ahead, what's at stake.
Yeah, I know Baylor's lost 2 in a row. I'm going to go with the Bears as well. They passed the eye test for me. I think they have a really good group of players. I'm a big fan of the Yves. Is it Yves Misi? Ivis Misi? I haven't gotten the pronunciation yet. He had a very very rough game against Houston, but just the upside that he has despite his rawness, and then they just have so many it's a typical Baylor team, not the best Scott Drew Baylor team, but they have some hoopers and they've passed the eye test for me. I'm gonna stick with them. Next game we got Auburn at Tennessee. I'll start with Matt here.
I mean, to me, this is Tennessee's game. I mean, they are at home. Auburn has been playing some pretty good basketball, but if we're going on the bubble talk or I guess the bracketology talk, Auburn is still 1-6 in quad one games. They haven't proven that they can beat the best teams, and especially with this game being at Tennessee, a Tennessee team that is still very much in contention for the last 1 seed. Give me Tennessee at home. This could be a game that really pushes the Vols up there to getting that 1 seed.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt, here. I don't see any reason to pick Auburn outside of Neville Arena at this point, especially against a team as strong as the Volunteers. I really like what they bring to the floor. Shout out to Kai Ziegler. I didn't mention this in the past in the SEC breakdown, but he finished with 14 assists to 0 turnovers in the win against Texas A&M. It's the most Kai Ziegler stat line you'll see out there. So I think it's an easy pick for me, Tennessee.
Tennessee as well. This would probably be pretty significantly Auburn's best win of the season if they won this game. So saying that in late February, it's not worth, picking that. It's too risky. Next, we got Dayton at Loyola Chicago, and I know I'm the biggest A10 guy on this pod. I'm actually going Loyola. This is a team that is on a roll. They've won 7 straight, 10 out of 11. I did not believe in Loyola a couple months ago, but I think if there's a specific team, which Dayton has been susceptible to some ugly grinded out losses anyway. But if there's a team that's going to turn it into one of those games that Dayton tends to lose, I think it's the Ramblers. They really have the formula to guard Deron Holmes. If Dayton happens to space it out and shoot a lot of threes, that's another threat they could get to. But it seems like where Holmes goes, they go, and I think Loyola could slow them down. So I'm going Loyola.
it's tough for me to pick against Loyola the way that they're playing lately. I mean, honestly, like Dayton with that recent loss, Loyola just on a roll, kind of under the radar because like everyone's looking at South Florida's run in the American. Well, Loyola's having the same type of run in the Atlantic 10 with another great coach in Valentine. So I just feel like this is a Loyola team that they're not really on the bubble yet, but if they get this win, I think you kind of start to consider them because they have enough of a resume, especially if they get this win. Give me Loyola Chicago. I think that they win this game, and I think that Dayton's a lock, but I think that Dayton better figure it out soon. I mean, it's a tough end to the season with this, but Loyola's taking this one.
Yeah, I was going to pick Loyola just on vibes anyway, but I tried to find a stat to help me out. Dayton in his past 4 games has struggled a little bit guarding from 2-point range. It wasn't the threes that were beating them. It was the inside game, and that's where Loyola's strength is offensively. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. I will like the Ramblers here as well to give it a sweep.
All right, moving on. We got Illinois at Wisconsin. I'll send it right back to you, Ben.
Yeah, obviously the line is not Arizona minus 12 here. That's my mistake as the producer. But I don't like either of these teams at this point in the season. I feel like I don't want to pick either, especially with how the Illini blew that Penn State game. But I guess I'll go with Illinois here. I just think they have slightly more star power overall, and Wisconsin's top scorers have struggled a little bit in the past month. So give me the Illini on the road.
Matt.
I mean, I don't know. This is kind of like such a toss-up to me because, like, after that Penn State loss, I'm really not sure what I feel about Illinois. I was starting to buy into them, and then I was like, like I don't know what to think anymore. Wisconsin, I was really bought into, and I'm sure everyone in America can agree that they just are not what they were. But this is the perfect opportunity for Wisconsin to turn that around, and I feel like Wisconsin understands that they need this win. They need a win like this to kind of capture back people trusting in themselves. I don't even know if that's like a talk that they'll have in the locker room, but maybe even amongst themselves. Like, hey, we need a win like this to get ourselves going before the Big Ten tournament. So I do like Wisconsin at home. I
don't. I have zero faith in Wisconsin right now. Not that Illinois has blown me away, but I think if we're talking about reliability, I'm going to go with the Illini. Game 5, we've got Marquette at Creighton. I'll send it back to Matt.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Marquette and Creighton, obviously, as we got my guy back here. I'm at work right now, so shout out to my boy Steve. He's one of the producers here at my work. I think that Marquette is a team that we could really see pulling off a win here at Creighton. But what I will say is that Creighton has a tough game against Seton Hall earlier in the week. So Creighton, 2 tough home games here. If I'm going to go with one of these games, I would take Marquette winning this one still. I feel like Creighton, coming off that recent loss, is going to beat Seton Hall. And then, kind of like I mentioned before, we've seen a lot of teams be susceptible to sort of winning a tough game early in the week, losing the next game. So give me Marquette upsetting Creighton on the road.
Yeah, I'm using the opposite train of thought here. I think Seton Hall is the exact type of game Creighton's going to drop, where they just and in one where they're going to get blown out, like they're going to lose by 18 to Seton Hall or something like that because they can't hit threes. But then they're going to get their heads straight and then get right back up and beat Marquette at home. I think the Blue Jays are so volatile. You never know what you're going to expect, so it's so hard to pick a Creighton game. But I think I'll take the Blue Jays here. Besides Marquette, just I don't know. Something seems off here. I don't feel like they're a top 10 team, but I can't put on my finger on why.
I'm picking Creighton. I think if we try to determine one pattern about this really volatile team, like you said, Ben, it's that they tend to play up to the better teams and down to the worst teams. I think they'll definitely be up for this game at home. They're coming off of a routing of UConn earlier, about a week ago, and they were competitive with Marquette a couple weeks ago on the road. So I'm convinced enough I'm going to pick Creighton in this game. And then we got New Mexico at Boise State. I mean, we talked about New Mexico a lot. I know Boise State did also win the first game of this season series, and they won it on the road for the Broncos. But I still don't like the matchup for Boise State. Just analyzing like the head-to-heads, New Mexico likes to get the ball to the rim and run, and Boise has one of the worst like defensive block rates in the country. They don't really protect the rim very well. So in that aspect, I'm going to go with the Lobos. I think each team takes it on the road in this series.
I don't know. New Mexico's been so tough to like trust after that last loss, and I know that it's just one game, but Boise State I feel like has been playing good. They might need this game a little bit more than New Mexico. They're at home. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I think the Broncos win this game.
I'm with Dan here. I think this is a ball handler versus ball handler matchup in terms of, guards on guards and then some wings as well. I just like Donovan Dent and JT Toppin a little bit more than Max Rice and Tyson Degenhardt at this point in the season offensively. I think this will be a relatively high-scoring game, and I like the Lobos to come out.
All right, and then finishing it off, we've got Gonzaga at St. Mary, sending it back to Ben.
I don't like this. I don't know what's going to happen in this game. I think that Gonzaga has quietly sort of figured things out. I don't think they're like to the point where I would pick them to win a game in a tournament or anything, but they've come around to being a pretty good team. That being said, St. Mary's can muck things up. We saw that happen on the road in Spokane, and I don't see any reason why it won't happen in Moraga. Give me the Gales at home to sweep Gonzaga for the first time in a while, I believe.
I'm not sure either, man. Like, this is such a tough one because like St. Mary's is playing so good. They haven't lost a conference game. I believe the longest winning streak in the country right now belongs to the Gales. But at the same time, I just ranked Gonzaga in my top 25 because they're playing good. They just beat Santa Clara by like 13 points. Graham EK is playing some really good basketball. He really has been all season, but I feel like it's just being noticed now. I like Gonzaga to steal this road win and make the WCC a clear 2-bid league.
I'm going to agree with Ben. I'm going to go St. Mary's. Both teams have figured it out. It's not just Gonzaga. St. Mary's has also been really hot, but St. Mary's seems to do well in this series at home. It seems to be like a home road split kind of thing. I believe St. Mary's has actually won the last two in the series when it's at their home arena. I believe that's true. You can fact check me on that. But yeah. And the matchup this season on the road, like, it was pretty competitive. So yeah, I'm gonna go with St. Mary's, and that will wrap up today's episode of the CBB Review Studio podcast. Thank you guys for watching and listening. Be sure to check us out on the socials. You can see that on the bottom of the screen right there. We're gonna be completely like covering conference tournaments and March Madness and everything at CBB Review. So be sure to check us out and interact with us. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks again, and take care.